Session Blood.
All right, welcome back, everyone, to Session Blood episode. To be honest, I don't even know. It's been so long. But I know what everyone out there's thinking. Kieran, aka Mr. Classic, do you even know what you're talking about anymore? You've been out the game for a while. The answer is maybe not really. But you know who does? My guest today. So I've got the winner of the New Zealand National Championships. I've got two of the semi-finalists on. So they've agreed to come on today, have a bit of a talk with me and each other, just sort of about their experience in nationals, their testing, what they thought of the metagame, all that sort of jazz. So without further ado, I've got the New Zealand national champion himself, Nick Holding, aka Tidu, aka Nick holding it down from Wellington, his hometown. So welcome to the show, first time on. And funny story, we actually tried to get you on a long time ago, back after the first New Zealand Nationals, when you won the ProQuest event there with none other than Kano, leading to James White himself giving you the official Drakai of Aether nickname. So thank you for coming on today. Do you want to just tell the audience a very quick intro about yourself? Could be anything, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Nick Holding from Wellington in New Zealand, and I won Nationals using Prism, pretty much an aura control build.
All right, well, thank you very much. And next up, we've got Tom Penny, aka the Warrior King. So one of our semi-finalists at New Zealand Nationals, and I know he had a lot of people rooting for him to do well. So Tom, for those who may not be aware of you, do you want to give a little background? How long have you been playing Fab? Who do you test with, that kind of jazz?
Yeah, thanks, Kieran. Tom Penny here. So I'm playing Briar, Mount Heroic Briar, at the New Zealand Nationals the past weekend, to a top 4 finish. And yeah, mainly testing with. The team's kind of big, but I guess the main testing partners for this tournament would have been none other than Rohan, of course, and Matthew Clark from Australia. A few others slogging out with us as well, Ash Singh, Aaron Curtis, people like that. Yeah.
All right, and that actually is an excellent segue into our third guest. So loyal listeners may be aware of Rohan, aka Reezy, who has been a guest on the show a few times before, and obviously one of New Zealand's top players, made New Zealand Nationals last year, and just got kind of binned off in the quarterfinal by a superior player. Don't know who that was, but it was someone pretty good. And but this time he did one better and made the semis. Rohan, welcome to the show. Do you want to give a little sort of intro just to our viewers out there?
Yeah, hey everyone, my name's Rohan. I'm sure a few of you have heard me on Session Blood before. I took Vista Rider Nationals, and I feel I did pretty well, got to the semis. And like Tom said, we did a lot of testing together, me and Tom. And yeah, we're pretty happy with where we ended up.
All right, so thank you very much, guys, for the little intro. So basically, we know who you are, we kind of know what deck you played. But I kind of wanted to dive a little bit deeper and just ask, what kind of prompted your decision to what made you land on the deck you ended up playing? Because I don't know about all our international viewers or even some of our local viewers, but I have to say the metagame surprised me a little bit. Obviously I kind of had this feeling that Briar might struggle a little bit because New Zealand has had so long to see how the other New Zealand metagames have played out. And I see Tom currently throat there. Don't worry, we'll give you a chance to say what you did well on Briar. But I want to start off with you, Nick, because to me, and I feel probably quite a lot of players, it felt just like Prism came back from the dead, came back from nowhere. I remember I was there during the weekend, someone told me there's 6 Prisms playing, during round 1 or something, and I thought, geez, that's 6 people braver than myself, but only to see you absolutely, stomp through the field. So have you been playing Prism for a long time? Is it something you just picked up a couple weeks ago and you thought, you know what, this is my hero? What led you to Prism?
So basically, I was on Kano ever since Arcane Rising came out, and in Constructed it has always been a struggle, and I sort of got sick of the idea. So when Monarch dropped, I saw Prism, and it's very similar to the type of playstyle I like. So I picked it up, and ever since then I've just been playing it constantly. And then even with Toa coming out, I couldn't find any other hero that just filled the void like Prism did.
Okay, so I suppose Kano, Prism, you're a man who likes playing at instant speed.
Yeah.
One thing, just before I move on and ask the others, I know a deck like Prism, so you have a lot of auras, obviously, which aren't very good at defending, as they defend for 0. Were you
Correct.
a little bit worried about, because, we've just seen Bry absolutely everywhere overseas. Like, did you expect to see, like, a lot of the sort of top players on Bry in New Zealand? Were you a little bit worried about that? Or was this a little bit of an example of good metagame where you figured, look, like, everyone's aware of Bry, massive target on her back. Maybe there's a few decks that beat Bry that I'm very good against. Did a little bit of that play into it at all?
Yeah, for sure. I figured most people would try to counter Briar, and obviously probably the easiest way to do that would be one of the Guardians, which is Prism's good matchup. So I figured if I could just dodge a few Briars and hopefully get lucky in the ones I do verse if I did, and then just hopefully clean through the Guardians.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll get back more into that in a moment. But obviously, speaking of Briar, Tom Penny, aka the Warrior King, who seems to have given up on Warrior. So
Yeah, apparently.
So what led you onto what a lot of people are calling the boogeyman, or should we say boogeywoman here of the format, Channel Mount Heroic Briar, or there's a few different
Sure.
Briar builds floating around, but that's definitely one of the more popular ones I feel recently. Were you a bit worried, seeing as it was a known entity, the Briar deck? Like, were you a bit concerned people knew how to play against it, or did you find yourself testing and something just clicked? Like, what led you to Briar?
Well, I mean, first of all, I really enjoy playing the deck. It's quite easy to play, pick up. It's a nice proactive deck, and I was expecting a fair amount of Guardian, like you say, to try to counter the typical Cheerios Briar, but I felt like I had quite, definitely great matchup into Bravo, and I sort of picked a lot more Bravo players than Oldham really to show up, just based on Auckland really, which turned out to be not quite the case, obviously. But really fun deck. It has great matchups across the board as well, really. So you don't have any real bad auto loss matchups, apart from maybe the Ice Lexi deck, which is pretty bad. But as I said, we're expecting quite a lot of Guardians, so we thought hopefully the Ice Lexis would stay at home, which was kind of the case. I managed to dodge the Lexi on day one.
So do you feel, I mean, I know you played a bit of Blitz sort of back in the early, shall we say, Ira meta days when Ira was very strong. One thing I felt back then is, like, when I ended up choosing a deck, I chose Ira because I figured, look, like, everyone's playing Ira, everyone knows what the deck does, but I feel I know the deck well, I back myself in mirror matches, and I back myself to know the lines of play in other matchups. Is that kind of, could I compare that a little bit towards your choice of Briar for this thing? So, look, like, everyone's going to know what I'm playing. Like, maybe I've got a little bit of spice here and there to mix things up, but that doesn't matter because I'm a good player. The deck is very good. You combine those two things together, and, if I just don't make mistakes and play well, I can back myself to make sort of the top 8 and break through. Yeah,
I mean, I was happy playing into the mirror, and that's mainly due to, I have faith in the testing, especially, I'm lucky enough to test some strong players that can play a bunch of different decks, so I can play the mirror into, someone like Rohan even, who, he's obviously on Viserai, but, learn the deck well enough and figure out how to adjust to the matchup, and it should be fine. I didn't expect too much Mount Heroic really, but I did end up playing a mirror.
I suppose, sorry, just to rephrase it slightly to clear it up, I feel like I asked it in a confusing way, but is it one of those things where even though other people knew what you were playing, that you felt like pretty confident?
Oh, right.
They might be trying to game plan you, but you knew how to play those lines against certain decks anyway?
Yeah, most people probably know what deck I was on, to be honest. I didn't try to hide it, but I guess my attitude towards the deck was that I'm trying to have the biggest turns you can really in the game. I feel like Briar can do that. So as long as I just focus on my own game plan, try not to get cucked by ice decks too much, I can find the right lines and tune the deck, better than perhaps some other players, hopefully.
Right, hashtag overload, and we'll come back to that one a little bit later because I love seeing that.
Oh, the tech.
Yeah, the tech. And Rohan, so I know you were on the Viserai deck, and, just because for our viewers, I actually know Rohan quite well. We've known each other for a very long time, so I knew you'd been on that Viserai deck for sort of quite a while, now, some players have told me that Viserai is one of the more difficult decks to learn to play at a really high level across multiple matchups. I feel there's a couple of different strategies you have to master, both that kind of like build up OTK strategy against slower decks, also the more mid-range aggro strategy against decks you might need to race. So I've heard Chain's one of those, for example. So I wanted to ask you, like, did you find two questions? First of all, was it quite difficult to like learn the deck? Was there a bit of a learning period where you were just getting smashed and you were kind of maybe like, is this the right choice? And secondly, what's your, like, how did you come across the deck? Were you a little bit inspired? I know Matt Rogers had a top 4 finish at the Calling. Did that kind of put it on your radar, or was it something you were thinking of already?
Yeah, so for me with Tales, I started off actually. When the Tales Heroes came out, I tried a bit of everything: Oldham, Lexi, Briar, and me and Jason Lai, actually, one of the people we test with, we're playing a Briar deck. This was early on in the meta when Prisms and Oldhams were everywhere. We're playing a Briar deck, like a mid-range Briar deck, a gentleman's Briar deck, you could say, with Veil of Flashes, Tome of Fandels, Blossoming Spellblade, Bramble Spark.
You keep things fair, you know. You do it like you do it like the devs intended.
Exactly. So we played that for a while, but then as the meta evolved, you see Cheerios come out. You realize Chain is actually still in the meta. That we realized that was quite weak, and I initially was sort of alerted to Viserai from Hamish from the UK. He top-aided the UK Nats, and at one point he was like, I think before his Nats, he was like, "Hey, look at the stick. What do you think of the stick?" And I remember first thinking like, Viserai, man, like whatever. I'm sure it's just okay. And then it was just crushing. He was on a pure mid-range strategy, and it just did really well. You're just surprised by the amount of damage it could pump out. So I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty cool. And then I got to give credit to Rogers. He played that deck in Orlando, and when I saw Viserai's ability to sort of pivot from a mid-range aggro game plan to an OTK game plan for the matchups where mid-range could be hard, at that point I was like, I really like this. I'm a big fan of decks that can sideboard into a pretty much a completely different game plan. So yeah, from there I started playing it, and you're absolutely right. Viserai is quite hard. For the first month or so, you draw a hand with like Rattlebones and become the Arc Knight, and you just think, I can play anything from my deck or my graveyard. Like, what do I do?
True.
And you just sit there and tank for like 5 minutes and then do the wrong thing. So yeah, it took a while, but once you get the hang of it, it's a really fun deck to play. There's so many lines.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know, I played a little bit of Viserai way back in the day. Back in my day, mate, let me tell you, pre-Crucible, we didn't have Moverium Skies. There was no meet and greet. That was a slog. Viserai's easy. They got it easy. They get Rosetta Thorn. It's nonsense, man.
I remember playing some games with you, Kieran. We were testing the old before it was good Viserai.
Yeah, like that's
trying to like race dash.
That's kind of a classic staple of mine. It's my catchphrase. I was playing this card before it was good, or a hero. I was playing Little Minnows and Chain before like some of the stuff was banned and when it was the wrong thing to do. But then some people started playing it now. I'm like, you just copied my strats. So, but yeah, that's interesting to hear. Yeah, that's two completely different strategies. I do remember the mid-range strategy, or sort of the aggro one. The bit of the concern was that, like, just how do you beat these decks like Oldham and Bravo? Like, they just defend everything. Eventually, you get off to a big lead, and then you start to, like, have bad turns at the end and lose. So this whole kind of thing, I think when we saw Matt top 4 at the Calling, I believe he worked with Nick Butcher on that deck as well, seeing, like, the sideboard strategy that just completely crushed the slow decks, then I feel that started to like open a lot of eyes for people and say, wait a sec, this is a legitimate contender. And actually, speaking of Matt, I just wanted to address that quickly, because obviously we got 3 of the top 4 here today, so we don't actually have Matt on board, but it's kind of a couple reasons. One, because even 3 people's kind of pushing it, and 2, I feel, no disrespect, we feel Matt is like one of the most amazing players in the world, but everyone knows Matt. He's one of the most famous Flesh and Blood players in the world, so I did want to take a bit of an opportunity to spotlight some other players that people might not know so well, particularly our new national champion, Nick Holden. So,
yeah, Neo Nick.
That's me.
So, Tom, you said Neo Nick, and I feel there's a little joke behind that. Do you want to run me through it?
Oh, I played Zero Briar all weekend, mate.
Okay.
I dodged every last one of them.
Jeez, I can feel the salt through the third place company screen.
Soul love.
That's all right. No. Anyway, so you guys run me through like why you chose your decks and everything, and like a little bit of background there. I just wanted to, keep things cracking along a bit. But what did the testing process look like a little bit? I know you've run me through a bit of it. Like you started up with a few decks and then you tried other things and then tested this or that. But what I'm kind of particularly interested in, even just generally, is like, first of all, do you guys largely test like within teams? Is that where you save some of your best strategies for? Or like, are you taking the same decks that you're going to play at Nationals down to your local armory, or what's going on there? And the second one is draft, because obviously draft made up 50% of Nationals this year, and it was make or break for a lot of people. Like, you can be the best constructed player in the world, but if you cannot draft or you take a bit of a bad turn, it can all go wrong. So I kind of wanted to start off with you, Nick, because I know a little bit about Tom and Rohan, because they say they test with each other and they've got sort of, a few people up in Auckland and overseas, but your testing group's a little bit of a mystery to me. Do you want to sort of talk me through some of your main testing partners, what your process is like?
Yeah, absolutely. So a while ago, I was living with Kashan Rao and Adam Little at a flat, and we invited over many people to come draft with us, and we ended up doing 2 to 3 a week for about 2 months straight, and we just constantly draft, and I would try different things. I would force Lexi one time, force Briar next, and then I just started forcing Oldham, and that's where I started to see all these lines of play and why I continued to draft Oldham.
Yeah, and Oldham, one of my favorite heroes to play in draft. There's a lot of cool things you can do with Oldham. One thing I wanted to ask about draft as well, did your sort of team while you're drafting, is it something that after the draft is done, you sort of sit down and compare notes a little bit? So you say, like, look, team, I started taking, say, for example, these Earth Blues, which I heard from a lot of top players, very good. I took these Earth Blues early, and it actually really allowed me to stay open. I started off in Guardian, then I switched to Briar, or even stuff like, I found out, I kind of read the signals. I saw I was the only Lexi player at the table, so I started picking these cards. Like, did your draft strategy evolve over like a number of different draft sessions from talking it out with your team and identifying certain signals or lines of play? Or is it more just kind of feel it out game by game, draft by draft kind of thing?
No, it was absolutely like, as we finished each draft, we'd sort of discuss to each other how it went, like, especially someone that won, like, why did it go so well for you? What was your drafting strategy? So you'd win and be like, I decided to draft as many Earth Blues as I can in Oldham, and discovered I had an easy way of fatiguing Lexi, for example.
Yep. So it is quite sort of a collaborative process there. It's important to, like, would you even say stuff sometimes like, if one of your teammates was sitting a seat to your left or right, or even one in between, and you'd say, oh, look, I was actually in this other class, but when I saw this card, 5th or 6th pick, that was the signal for me to swap, and it did really well. Does it go down to that sort of level of analysis and breakdown at times?
It did, actually, yeah. I believe we had a draft where 5 of us were Oldham, and 1 or 2 of us realized early and started switching, and we had a lot easier time in that event.
Okay, and the final thing I wanted to ask you just quickly about your constructed testing, did you ever have sort of concerns that, for example, I don't know if you tested more just within your group or there was a wider Wellington play group, so I'd be interested there, but if your testing was more within kind of a smaller team, did you ever have concerns about your sort of testing becoming a bit within a bubble? So, for example, you're adjusting your play strategy towards how your friends play or against their certain decks, because like, my mate's always playing Briar and Viserai, for example, so I'm going to tweak my deck a little bit more towards those and ignore some others. Is that something you're worried about, or could your team play like a whole lot of different decks and you manage to put those biases to one side?
Oh, like, the worry of the bias was always there, but we were able to jump between decks amongst each other. Like, I must say, like, I wouldn't say we were the best at piloting the other decks. So, like, I played Briar for a bit. I definitely was no amazing Briar or anything of the sort. But it also helped me understand how the deck works, what the turns try to look like, and what I could do as the prison player to stop that or at least slow it down.
So you think it's quite important, like, if there's a deck that is kind of the best deck in the metagame or one of the most played, do you think it's quite important, even if you have no intention of playing that deck at a tournament, to actually get a few reps in it so you can sort of put yourself in the mind of your opponent?
Oh, absolutely. Because if you can see the lines of plays when your opponent starts playing them, you might be able to work out what they're trying to do, and then you'll know what to do in response to it.
It's not bad. You're like, you're facing down someone and they attack in a certain way. You're like, hey, I know you're going for the lightning press here. I've played the same play myself. So.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Okay, well, moving on to like Tom and Rohan. Honestly, you guys can feel free to chime in. Wherever. Don't feel you have to take
Sure.
turns, whatever. But I know for our viewers out there, I know you two have tested together for quite a long time now. You know what Nick was saying about the draft strategy and some of the questions I was asking him. Does your experience match up in some respects to that, or was it a little bit different?
I mean, it must be nice to be able to draft 3 times a week the last 2 months. I mean,
Yeah.
I think we were in lockdown for a fair amount longer, eh? I mean, I think I drafted 3 times, maybe before nationals and paper, and a couple of times on a simulator. And I think I drafted Oldham and Lexi because I knew ultimately they would be harder for me personally to master and draft. Quickly realized that there was no chance that I would have time to be able to play these effectively. So my plan for draft was to force Briar, basically. It was as simple as that.
Yeah, Force, one of the most popular draft classes. You can see why this guy made top 4. You know, somehow it worked out for him.
I think people might have picked up on it, and they were just scared to clash, knowing that how convicted I was towards forcing. So they sort of got out of the way a little bit, and it worked in my favor there.
Yeah, to quote a great Survivor line, Tom said to himself, "Stick to the plan." And Rohan, I know. Is your thing with Tom a little bit similar, or did you manage to get a few additional drafts in? Were there maybe a few people from, overseas or I don't know, just run me through your draft testing strategy a little bit.
It was relatively similar to Tom's. We were in lockdown for so long. We played a few drafts online. It's not really the same, though. I tried talking to a bunch of people who have drafted, people overseas, being like, what do I do? What do you do? How do you win? But at the end of the day, I got like 4 drafts in, maybe 2-3 weeks before Nats, and I just wanted to feel it out. I just wanted to see how other people draft, what the packs look like when there's someone to your right in a certain class, and I feel like you want to get a feeling of what power level a class needs to 3-0, and
Yep.
and I think in Tails there is a bit of a discrepancy. Like, you need a really strong Lexi deck to 3-0, but you can 3-0 with a middling Oldham or Briar deck.
And as a man who I believe had to 3-0 on day 2 to make top 8, you were probably pretty happy you had some of that knowledge.
Yep, I was. I think, it was weird actually at Nats. My feeling was I was in the 2-1 pod going into draft, and I got the vibe that people were just a bit jittery, a bit nervous to get their second loss, and I ended up in a pod with 6 Briars, I think. So
wow.
that was crazy. And then day 2, I feel, was a little bit different. People maybe were conscious of the fact that so many people forced Briar that we ended up in a bit of a cleaner pod. I think it was 3-3-2 or something like that.
And I just wanted to ask you, kind of like I was asking Nick before as well, your classic constructed testing strategy, because I think a lot of people will be quite interested in this as well. How did you... I just want to get a feel for how this testing kind of goes in teams. Like, do you have like a testing like schedule? Do you say like, hey everyone, like we're playing an hour and a half, 2 hours per night at these times? Like, do you keep spreadsheets with data to like track the matchups? Basically, I just want a bit of an insight into how you organize your classic constructed testing strategy, and I don't know, even things that you felt went well, things that didn't, things that you'd prefer to improve upon.
Yep. I'm taking notes, man. That idea of tracking matchups is good. I'm gonna do that next time. Yeah, no, we didn't have anything too organized, but like luckily we had Australian Nats coming up with Matt Clark, and then we had New Zealand Nats coming up. So between us, we had a bunch of people who were just, say, 3 weeks from Nats, just knuckled down and were just playing. Or you could just jump on and be like, anyone want a game? And there were people interested in games. Obviously, you want to run decks through a gauntlet a little bit. So like in this meta, the obvious one was Briar. I didn't expect it to be like some of the other nationals we saw globally, where it's like 80% Briar at the top tables, but Briar was the deck this season where, like, if you're not sure what to play, you're going to Nats, you haven't had a chance to really like refine a list you want to play, you just pick Briar. It's powerful, it's not too hard, not too difficult to pick up. Obviously every deck I think has a high ceiling, but So yeah, a lot of it was testing into Briar, and then we also
so,
think
so
what
what are you
else
telling
is
me
in the
if,
meta.
for like for the Tom Pennies of the world, so to speak, you want to pick up Briar?
It's a lot easier to pick up than something like Prism or even Oldham, right?
Well,
Just being proactive and attacking and just making sure that you you sequence your attacks and your non-attack actions the right way. Then that's all there is to it, really.
That's fair, because I have heard that like decks like, for example, we've already mentioned Viserai, but even decks like Chain, for example, which you need to sort of pitch stack and play in a very particular way against fatigue. Oldham, of course, like there's quite a lot to it. I feel Prism's quite the same. So not to say Briar is easy, but there might be some of these additional. You could even say maybe Briar sort of tests a few of your fundamentals a bit more, but the other decks require a bit more specialization and time for their particular playlines.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And also, I mean, I wanted to ask you, Nick, as well. Do you agree with sort of Tom and Rohan here, where if I can borrow a term from MMOs like World of Warcraft, for example, there used to be these bosses that people would call gear checks, and the idea was it didn't matter how good your team worked together, it didn't matter how sort of smart or great at the game you were. There was a certain sort of level of power you needed to beat these decks. Would you sort of consider Briar like the gear check of the format? So, for example, I mean, it's funny, I suppose I'm asking you, but you're saying you managed to like dodge a few of these, but even on the Prism one, which you kind of felt Briar may have been a difficult matchup, did you feel that there was something you had to test against enough because you figured like, look, I might run into one or two Briars and I need to have like a strategy in mind for how to play against them and beat them?
Yeah, absolutely. Like in testing, I ran into Briar like a brick wall, and I lost countless games trying to figure out the right strategy. I tried all sorts of different things, just racing and yada yada. And yeah, it's definitely favoured in Briar, but I found small little tricks I could do along the way to hopefully tilt it in my favour. But I still don't think it was a good matchup. Like, I don't think Prism was a good choice for Nationals. I just really got lucky on my matchups.
He's too humble. A humble hero. But I think that's actually quite interesting. You say that you find little tricks, little lines here and there that can help out, because I feel it is really important. Because honestly, at these tournaments where the difference between, I mean, obviously you ended up 11-1 in Swiss, and I think something outrageous like 14-1 for the tournament. So you were very safe. But a lot of times making the top 8 can come down to the matter of, one game across sort of 12 different rounds. And, sometimes I feel doing well in tournaments can be about sometimes winning those games you weren't meant to win, or like winning those very difficult matchups. Maybe sort of finding a way to bluff someone, outplay them, do something a little bit different. When I used to play Katsu quite a lot back in Classic Constructed in the day, I always used to say Katsu, anyone can play a great Katsu hand. Like, anyone can play the Red Surging into Gus Wave into McGinchie's with the Ancestral Empowerment, That's that's the dream. But it's about making those off turns count, making those really difficult ones, things where you have to think and actually maximize damage. And I feel that's applicable in a way a little bit to some of these things when you're playing. Like, nearly every deck has a bad matchup, right? So you just need to figure out, how can I make these bad matchups better? How can I put myself in a position to like win a must-win game when I might be on the ropes a little bit? So, kind of moving on from that, I just wanted to run through, we can go through this quite quickly, but starting with you, Nick, did you feel that the Nationals metagame, did that like surprise you? Were you sort of shocked when you turned up and you maybe saw the constructed deck sort of breakdown at the end of day one? Or was it sort of roughly what you expected?
It was roughly what I expected, to be honest. I probably thought there might have been more Briar. I was obviously really relieved to find out there was less. But yeah, I figured there was going to be a lot more Guardians than there actually were, which is half the reason why I chose Prism.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. And what about you, Rohan and Tom? Was it kind of roughly what you were thinking? Were you a bit surprised that, because I think Briar was about 24-25% of the field roughly. Was that sort of in line with what you were expecting?
I was expecting Viserai and Briar mainly. I think they were the two most represented decks on day one as well.
They were the top two. Top two.
Yeah, but I mean, Prism was definitely a little. I mean, there were only 6 decks, but I mean, I was saying kind of half joking really before the tournament that my hot take was 0 Prism at Nationals, but I mean, that was always probably never going to happen. There are a couple of Prism mains and diehards that were going to play it, but we felt like it was potentially not the greatest into a Briar field. But then again, if you have great matchups against Viserai and the Guardians, and we did expect Guardians, and as Nick said, maybe Prism wasn't the best choice, but to be fair, once you get to the top tables there mid day one, it was actually such a good spot. I mean, all the top tables were Guardian really. So once you get through those first few rounds, it's a bit of a gauntlet. You know, a bit of a roulette. You don't know what you're going to get, and you know, again, we were saying the pairings were so important in the CC rounds because every deck has a bad matchup, like you say, or some tougher matchups. So yeah, the pairings were huge, I think, in this tournament.
Yeah. Okay. Well, is that about the same as you, Rohan? You feel that the meta was roughly what you expected?
I'm very surprised by Prism. How they did. I thought there'd be a few more chains, to be honest, and a few less Prism. But it's actually an interesting meta call. If you think people are going to make decks that beat Briar, because people are thinking people on Briar, you just take Prism, right? Like, what are they going to play? Viscerize and Guardians to beat Briar? And you just smash them. At one point, I looked at the top tables, and there was like Guardian, Prism, Guardian, Briar, Prism, or something. And I was just like, wow, Prism's in a decent spot here.
That's the thing, right? You can take it as, like, as Nick was saying, maybe a slightly calculated risk and say, I feel a lot of the sort of top players are going to turn up on these anti-Bri decks. So if I'm kind of the anti-Bri decks, you know, if I get through the first rounds, can back myself in draft, and suddenly if I'm sitting at 5-1-6-0, hey, there might not be a whole lot of Briars at these top tables anymore. And maybe I can get to a position where I can make it through to day 2 with a pretty good record. You know, I've had to play one Briar deck. Maybe I beat it, maybe I don't. And then day 2's draft. So if I'm a good drafter, if I need to make, you know, say I need to go 2-1 and draft to make day 2, to make the top 8, and then I'm in a great spot, then, hey, why wouldn't I? And I feel like I was one of those people as well that just didn't give respect to Prism, so I ended up looking like a fool. You know, I remember like talking to a few people who are talking about tuning their decks and saying like, I need to get more 6 power in, I need to dedicate these slots to Prism, and I'm like, Prism, no one's going to play Prism. Like,
Yeah.
That was what I thought as well.
Yeah, no one's going to play Prism except the 14-1 national champion. He's going to play Prism.
Sure am.
It's like a lot of the minor tweaks you do to your deck, I'm assuming a lot of the top players didn't do that for Prism, you know? All the little sideboarding decisions and stuff, you just like, I'd sit across from a Prism and I'd just be like, with a few cards different, my deck would be so much better into this matchup, but you have to forego them for cards that are good against other matchups that you expect to see more.
Yeah, that's true, right? Because as the meta gets more diverse and you expect more decks, those sideboard slots are at absolute premium. Like
so tight.
You've got your 60, you know, a 60 card deck minimum. You've probably got anywhere from sort of 5 to 7-ish equipment, so depending on your deck, maybe, you know, give or take 1 or 2. So when it comes to getting in that last anti-Briar card or another 6 power for Prism, it becomes, you know, it's hard. It's hard to make the right call. So on that, I mean, we've spoken about the New Zealand metagame a bit. One thing I wanted to ask you guys as well was because obviously New Zealand, we're right at the end of the national champions season. So we've seen pretty much, apart from Australia, every other nationals happen around the world, including the United States one, which is massive. They're right at the start. We've had really big ones in, say, like, you know, UK, Germany, places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore. Oh, sorry, no, Singapore got cancelled. Shout out Singapore, sorry. But do you feel the New Zealand meta was pretty different to some of these? Like, do you think we kind of had the benefit of hindsight, a little bit of benefit of knowledge, seeing what everyone else was playing in their metas?
Yeah. I'd say so. I think the main thing was, like, when this Briar deck came out, everyone else's nationals was so close, so it was like a mad scramble. It's like, can you figure out how to beat this deck in like 1.5 to 2 weeks, or do you just play it? Because no one else will be able to figure out how to beat it as well. Whereas we had like 2 months. And by the end, I know a lot of people were just like, yeah, I beat Briar. And I think I expected how diverse it would end up being. I didn't expect to see like 7 Briars in the top 8, at least.
Yeah, does that sort of match up roughly what you were thinking, Nick, as well? Like, I'm guessing as a Prism player, you're thinking, hey, I'm playing this if it's like 70% of the field. But were you kind of thinking the New Zealand metagame, you know, with the benefit of time and seeing everything else and trying to develop these decks, did you expect to see a bit less Briar than overseas?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I figured most of the big dogs in New Zealand wouldn't play Briar. Like, I knew there would still be some, such as Tom, but I figured, you know, like Kale, for example, I pretty much banked on him being on Bravo, and I wasn't sure about Matt, but I thought he might have gone like Oldham or Bravo.
Yep, fair. Because the thing about these decks like Oldhim and Bravo as well, like, if we take Kale, a Bravo legend, has played that deck, knows it inside and out, but even if we look at Matt, the deck choice, initially on the day, I was like, okay, I heard some rumors floating around that he may be playing a couple of different decks, so Oldhim is an interesting choice, but then you look at it and you just go, this deck is so consistent, right? It's going to do it's going to do what you want it to do, like 9 times out of 10. It's very hard to say on like certain other decks, even like Viserai, sometimes Rohan, for example, you have a bad Sonata, it throws you off, or you don't build the rune charms up early on a game that you need to, and you kind of get a little bit stuck. Or Tom, for example, Channel Mount Heroic, you don't see the plunder runs, you don't see the Mount Heroics, the game goes downhill. But in Oldhim, I feel you're less susceptible to those, because at its core, you can swing with a hammer, you can play like a bunch of go again attacks, you've got big attacks, you've got Crown of Seats to help filter. And so the more I thought about it, the more it made like a lot of sense to me that Matt, one of the game's very best players, is playing a deck that he can just back himself to skillfully pilot and very much reduce as much variance as possible.
I gotta say that Oldhim deck was sick. Like, shout out to Matt. I'd love nothing more than to smash him in a tournament, but that Oldhim deck was so good, and he played it so well.
Yeah, it makes sense.
He really did.
It makes sense he was on it after the fact. We didn't put him on it to be, based on the Oldhims I was running into occasionally, but the deck was sweet.
Yeah, no, it was very cool. Like the Zealous Beltings, like the yellow glacial footsteps. It had
Blue Frostfang, man.
Blue Frostfang was the card for me as well.
Blue Frostfang, if you look at that deck as well, like for example the Art of War, and really leaning into playing a whole lot of attack actions to sort of make that as relevant as possible. I thought it was very cool. I thought it was very cool seeing some of that stuff, because I think it's tempting to look at Oldhim and just go, okay, yeah, you're playing Oldhim, your deck's like, hey, it's pretty much the same as other guys. But when you really dig down into it, and when you see there's sort of 8 to 10 to 11 cards that are very different, and then it's tuned in that way, I think you start to see some of the real thought and intelligence that goes into towards some of those meta picks. And I do believe, like we said before, that Matt does a lot of testing with, I think with Tarek and Nick Butcher. I don't know exactly who built the deck or who contributed, but shout out to both those guys as well, because I'm sure they had a big hand in that. Speaking of Tarek, our US national champion, that kind of segues me a little bit into my next point. I wanted to ask, now, I'll say this knowing that, us Kiwis, I feel at times, get a bit of a bad rap for kind of like, having a bit of friendly banter, shall we say, with other countries saying, New Zealand's still the best, their skill level has to catch up in other countries, like we've been playing a little bit longer than you guys, etc., that kind of stuff. Usually in good fun, I hope, but, I just wanted to ask you guys, now that you've played in New Zealand Nationals and you've had the ability to like maybe go back and watch some of the games, you've been able to watch all the overseas nationals, do you feel that the rest of the world has sort of pretty much largely caught up to New Zealand? Because I think it is fair to say New Zealand was ahead for a while, but do you guys think that it started to be pretty even these days? Maybe we'll start with you, Tom.
Yeah, I think probably for the most part, I'd say so. I have, like probably said earlier, I haven't paid too much attention to a lot of the overseas tournaments, but the stuff I've seen, it makes me think that the people I know from overseas are definitely some great players there.
All right, and what about you, Nick? I don't know if you've had a chance to actually watch a whole lot of the international sort of tournaments and stuff as well, but do you have much experience like seeing even like say some of the top 8 of big tournaments overseas, and do you get a sense of how you feel the game is progressing in different areas of the world?
I myself haven't actually watched many videos, but I assume it would be something along the lines of what Rohan was saying, like their meta being heavily Briar was because, not everyone was used to beating Briar with their particular deck, whereas we had 2 more months to tweak things around, learn the matchup, and do what we can to beat it. But I would like to think that they're probably equal level with us.
And is that kind of your feeling as well, Rohan?
Yeah, so I watched quite a bit of the US, and I was actually surprised by the Hong Kong nets, and I think the gap, if there was, well, there was probably a gap, but that's completely gone pretty much. You see the top US players play, and it's super clean. They always take the best lines, I think the skill gap's pretty much caught up. One thing I wonder is maybe like with deck building, there might still be a small gap, just because people here have been forced to build decks from scratch since the start of the game. Whereas a lot of people overseas, it's like, oh, I want to play Dash. All right, here's Matt Rogers' Dash deck. And then you change a couple of cards, you know? That you kind of have optimized lists at the ready for a lot of the older heroes. Whereas I feel there might be more experience here with getting to that point.
That's a fair point. I would say, because to give all the viewers, all our listeners, my opinion, I feel, having watched like quite a lot of this, obviously with my role involved in organizing some of these tournaments, I like to sort of check in and out here and there and watch some of the top 8s and the finals. I do, I love my Kiwi players, I love the Kiwi community, but I do honestly feel that, when we're comparing, say, like top 8, top 16s, top 24s, I do feel a lot of the big meta games overseas have caught up. I mean, even if there's like, even if at times it's sort of slightly behind the small communities that are still getting there, I feel it's all trending in a very positive direction, which makes me super keen for international play. One thing I will say, Rohan, is I think that's a good point, but I would sort of come back at that a little bit and say, if we look at some of the decks that have come out in the format, for example, say, Tarek Patel's Lightning Briar, which I feel originated with him overseas, not so much in New Zealand, and a couple other decks here and there. For example, I know Saber's Bolton over in Poland. Shout out to Poland. The second place player over there played that and was put on an absolute masterclass. Nearly took out the whole tournament. And I know people might be tempted to say, Saber's Bolton, it's not a very good deck, maybe which is an easy metagame, but I disagree. I think Poland's one of like the top most competitive communities in the world, and to do well with that deck, you have to be a very, very good player. And also over in Hong Kong, the Oldham deck over there, which was maybe a bit of a precursor to Matt Rogers. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying like, hey, he took the deck from there or he couldn't have built it without it, because Matt's deck and the Hong Kong deck were very, very different. Like, let me emphasize that. But I had to say, I looked through that Oldham list and I'm like, this is super cool. We've got cards like Art of War in here to like really utilize that third resource on, Rampant of the Ram's Head, Crown of Seeds. What's the third resource? Well, it can be Nolrun, but if it's not that, maybe it's an Art of War. You can like dig through your deck, for example, if you need to for certain cards. So I think it'll be cool to see. I did just want to ask you guys that because, like, maybe to clear the air a little bit, because I feel there's this, I like there to be sort of harmony between New Zealand and the international community. I think there largely is, but it's good to hear you guys say that as well, that you feel
absolutely
the same.
Honestly, I think if places like America keep getting these 500-person huge events, they're gonna go ahead. They're gonna overtake like a lot of the rest of the world when it comes to like skill level, because it's just such a crazy amount of games.
For sure.
That's true. And big tournament experience, it's hard to like, there's something intangible about that, isn't there? Like when you're sort of playing on the big stage, there's a bit more pressure when you're sort of, playing for winning in the top 8 at nationals, for example, as opposed to even things like Armory and Skirmish. Like, no disrespect towards those, but I feel those you kind of go along to more have a good time and like, play a bit more casually even, or semi-competitive. But, when there's 14 people crowding around your table watching your every move, the pressure's on.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I did want to ask you guys, so I'll keep cracking on because I know we've gone a little bit longer than I thought, but we'll try one things up. I just wanted to ask your thoughts on the bans and erratas now that you've sort of played nationals, which was exempt from both the bans and erratas. Do you think, is it something that you feel was, because some people might be tempted to say, oh, look, there's only one Briar in the top 8, what a waste of time, we didn't need it. But do you feel that the bans and erratas are good going forward to help diversify the metagame and sort of increase player experience? Or do you go the other way and say sort of, hey, I feel this tournament shows the invisible hand of the meta will adapt? And maybe I'll start off with you, Nick. I'm kind of curious to hear what you think on this.
Well, as a prison player, I'm very happy with the ban list, for sure. But yeah, like honestly, Plunder Run caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting something to happen to that. I felt Ball Lightning was... I didn't like Ball Lightning just because of the way how the interaction works with dealing damage and prevention and all that. Like, I felt like Ball Lightning might have been fair if it was worded the same as Odor Wrath, for example, where you have to deal the damage to get the bonus. Right,
and just to explain to people out there who may not understand that interaction, is this with things like Sting of Sorcery, for example?
Yeah, exactly. With Sting of Sorcery, where they're coming at you with 1 arcane, so you go to prevent it, but it goes to 2, and then you end up taking 1 anyway.
Yeah, which is very frustrating, particularly when there's like multiple Ball Lightnings coming in. And
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's one of those things where you're yet to be sold, shall we say, on the Plunder Run ban, but you feel sort of Ball Lightning's kind of in the net sort of positive for the game.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I did not like what Ball Lightning was doing. Like, I had games where people went Sting and then triple Ball Lightning, and it was just ridiculous.
No, I think I saw actually Rohan do that in draft at some point because.
Oh my god!
Must be pretty nice to put it off unlimited, but well, now we've got Ryan. I'm going to save time for last as the Briar player here. But Ryan, what are your kind of thoughts? Maybe if you could split it into like when they first were announced and having had the experience of playing through nationals at a like highly competitive tournament where there weren't those in effect. What do you reckon? And you can be honest. You don't have to sugarcoat it if you disagree.
Okay, sure. So, when they were first announced, I was pissed, man. I was like, "What are these? What are these bans?" Like, I don't think Briar's overpowered because we've been testing for nets at that point, right? We were we were just grinding away, and a lot of the decks we were playing were like doing pretty well this Briar. But as time went on, I kind of thought about it, and like Flesh and Blood, like there is high level competitive play, sure, and in my opinion, I don't think those bans were directed for that level of play. I just think like if you imagine just your average armory and someone's like, like they're getting into the game, they're taking their fun deck and they turn up and they just get completely destroyed by Mount Heroic Briar in like 4 turns. I think as time went on, I've come around to the bans a bit more. I think it's probably good for the game as a whole.
And that's interesting because, like, I have to say myself, because for our listeners, I'm not sort of involved in the dev side of things, but I was scratching my head a little bit, just as like a sort of, shall I say, former competitive player. Just from what I'd heard, it's like, well, hey, Briar isn't actually absolutely smashing everything, so, and like the players seem to feel pretty confident they can beat Briar. So what's going on here? But I think Rohan's point actually does strike a bit of a chord with me as well, because like you said, like some stuff like Armory. You go along and hey, I've built my Azalea decks. I really like Rangers. I'm going to have a fun time. Or like, hey, I've got this cool new Leviathan strategy. Or even like some decks like, I've got this like Katsu deck. Man, it's fun. I've got my legendaries. I'm going here. And then it's just miserable, right? It's miserable sometimes. Yeah. I've played against this damn deck and you're sitting there and they go like, okay, like I'll make a rune chant pass. You're like, okay, all right, we're off the race. I've done nothing. Then you attack and they take like 12 damage. And you're like, okay, Flesh and Blood's a pretty cool game, and then suddenly it's like Plunder Run into this, into that, and they've drawn like 3 cards, you've taken 18 damage, you've got no cards in hand, and then you like look at the board, you're like, wait a second, that Mount Heroic stays around till next turn? Like, it's just not very fun. And also, another thing, maybe Tom, I'll lead this into asking you, for, I don't really like talking about other TCGs on this podcast too much, because we're Session Blood all the way, baby, 100%, but I know there's probably a few former players from games like Magic from back in the day, and one thing that always comes to my mind is like the Ravager Affinity deck, and there was a metagame where, particularly with Skull Clamp and stuff back in the day, where you played Affinity or you played Anti-Affinity, and you saw people playing stuff like, I mean, for those who this is all just a totally foreign language, it was a deck based around artifacts that got better with the more you played, and then there were a lot of anti-artifact cards that said like destroy target artifact. So classic cards in Flesh and Blood, you'd sideboard it and out. Magic works a bit differently, but you'd have all these people running all these cards in their deck to beat the Ravager deck. And so like, Ravager wouldn't win, and it would get like 2 decks in the top 8, and you could say, hey, Ravager sucks, like, what are you noobs talking about? But the fact that the metagame was completely warped because of that deck, on top of it not being fun for casual play, kind of is what I feel led to the ban header being swung. And Tom, do you feel that's a little bit like what played into the bans we saw here with Plunder Run and Ball Lightning?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't think it was because Briar was an unbeatable deck. It absolutely wasn't. I mean, I can name Ice Lexi. Oldham is definitely tough, especially if it's with a great pilot. And even Viserai. I mean, when we first, Rohan and I started testing that matchup, it felt extremely favored towards Viserai, and I'm talking like, I would win 1 game out of maybe 15, 20 to start with. So, I mean, that sort of changed a little bit through testing, I guess, but, it was definitely a beatable deck. I think, however, that it probably did lock out some of the other decks from being really competitive, which may be fine. Other aggro decks, for example, that are just not going to have a favorable matchup against Briar, right? When it's like an aggro mirror, you're both trying to be proactive, block as little as possible and be attacking, it's very difficult, especially against the embodiment tokens, right? So when Tails came out, the deck I played to start with was actually Lightning Lexi for a fairly long time. The deck was very powerful. It had, you'd set up these 10 card hands with, Art of War and 3 of a Kind, and you're doing some pretty busted stuff. But, other than the inconsistency of the deck perhaps a little bit, you have things like, a 1 card block for 5 or 6 from Briar that sort of just, it was just a bit unnecessary. And obviously it wasn't what was intended, and the deck was sort of, in my mind at least, unplayable because of that the hero power, which is, I don't know, fairly clearly a lot more powerful than your average hero power, and even just the lightning side of it, which you can only obviously do once per turn. So I'm a big fan of the errata. The timing of it maybe was, I'm not too sure about that, but if it needed to happen earlier or whatnot, but it's certainly, at an armory level, Rohan knows I'm fond of me old armories. Armory Arnold over here. So you've got to have a bit of fun. And
Hey Arnold.
So hopefully it means that newer players are going to have a bit more access to winning games or learning and not just getting smashed back. And maybe some of the other archetypes are going to be a bit more playable. But I think we have to remember as well that Briar has it has the biggest card pool right at this stage in the game, and the Cheerios version, even the Mount Heroic, which is quite similar and was leaning into zero cost attacks very heavily. Those aren't the only builds of Briar. I don't think that's really the main focus of where the hero was developed as well. You have cards like Fulminate, Blossoming Spellblade, Flicker Wisp that were probably tested quite a lot and have a place in some kind of a constructed deck for Briar. So, about the Ball Lightning and the Plunder Run. I'll start with Ball Lightning. Actually, Ball Lightning was a card I actually I wouldn't say I called to be banned, but I think there was one armory where we were discussing, if you had to ban two cards, or if you have to ban one card, what would it be? And I said, well, Ball Lightning. Maybe at the time I was a bit salty and I would say, ban Skeletor, too good. But definitely, Skeletor, definitely not too good. But I think Ball Lightning's one of the cards, just take the meat out of the deck so it can't just easily get go again. It has to work harder, I guess.
Yep.
Make the deck work a bit harder, use the creepers, use some of the other tools like Vela Flash to get those sequences and big turns, which it's definitely capable of doing. And as well, like the card sort of leads to some weird interactions and can be a little bit frustrating. Probably the power level's a little bit high on that card, but the Plunder Run is, my first reaction really to that is I'm not a huge fan of the ban. I'm not sure it was really needed, but it's unfortunate, I guess, maybe for something like Katsu who might want it. But I think that'll tie in later with future releases, and I think there'll be some sort of replacement for that. Maybe something that's a little bit tuned down on the power level. Maybe something that doesn't affect every attack action this turn to draw a card, which is one of the best things you can be doing. One of the best on-hit triggers, right? So hopefully something that's similar, but maybe not quite as good.
Yeah, and we'll see how it plays out. I know when Seeds of Agony was banned, it was sort of chains dead, but that deck definitely had a second life about it. We had one on the top at New Zealand Nationals, still a very powerful deck, and I think, like you alluded to, Tom, Briar has a lot of tools. There's a lot of cards that haven't really been explored a whole lot, so I feel the deck will just be forced to evolve rather than completely die out. That's my hope anyway. So I think, like you were saying, turning off some of these cards I felt a bit unfair because they make, you'll go against too easy, like Ball Lightning, and turning on Rosetta Thorn, stuff like that, or Plunder Runs. Maybe we'll see. We'll see. We can't pass judgment just yet, but it was good to get your guys' opinions on that. It was quite interesting. Now, I think we better start to wrap things up because I've been holding you guys too long, and our listeners are probably getting bored of hearing me talk at least, but I'm sure they're loving you. Now, what I wanted to ask is there any one thing that you wish you could take back or do differently at nationals? And honestly, Nick, I'm probably gonna go with you last to give you a bit of time to think, because you're like, hey, I went 14-1, like I won the event, like what would I do differently? Maybe I'd like have a different coffee on day 2, you know. But,
Ask Rogers to spit shine the trophy.
Okay, so maybe with that, Tom, maybe I'm going to start with you. Is there anything, throughout the event that you spoke about Rogers? I actually watched and commentated your semi-finals game. Is that something you might have done a little bit different, or?
Yeah, I mean, overall, happy with the weekend. It was a great one, but as far as gameplay, I feel like I played pretty well like the whole time, except for the semi-final, which wasn't the worst ever, but just a couple of strategic errors rather than sort of game, like misplays that maybe just more of a, not what I would normally do, but because it's Rogers and the semi-final, it's a little, you just maybe play a bit safer or something. So I probably would play Tunic against Matt if I could do over, just for the getting around the frostbite when you're trying to play a Tome Harvest, something like that, and for the Rosetta. But I mean, to be honest, it was a great weekend, so I can't be, I don't want to live with too much regret. It was a great result overall.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like that you played an attack on 2-1 and used 2 lightning presses again.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's probably the other one. I mean, I probably wanted to save those.
It's not like you'd live to regret that, but anyway. No, I'm just joshing you. Like, it was an incredible result. You kind of mirrored me from last year. Second, Switzerland, third in the thing. So,
yeah.
Now, same question for you, Rohan. Now, I know you put yourself under a lot of pressure with do or die sort of winning into day 2 and the final round of day 1. And then having the 3-0 that draft in day 2. So, is there anything that you'd maybe do different a little bit looking back?
Yeah, so for a couple of days, obviously really happy with the results, so like you don't regret it as much. But I'm thinking, like, if I hadn't topped, I think there were a few mistakes in a couple of games that I probably regret. But the biggest thing I would take back is probably my whole first draft.
I heard a rumor you had a couple of cracked balls.
Yeah, so I was playing Briar, and I had 2 cracked baubles and a yellow entwine ice, which is like a cracked bauble that blocks 2. So I don't know what happened that draft, but I would love to just redo that whole thing.
Yep, fair enough. You get those miserable drafts sometimes, especially it's worse when it's in a big tournament, and
Yep.
you kind of get halfway through or towards the end of pack 2, and you're like, oh, what have I done? No.
Yep.
What about me? And Nick, I've given you, I've stalled for as long as I can. I've given you about 2 or 3 minutes. Maybe is it having breakfast somewhere different on day 1, or like anything you've done different?
Getting
So
work
in the
off
last
on Monday.
round, that for sure. I would have loved to have got work off Monday so I could have partied with everyone that night. But aside from that, I think the biggest thing I'd want to take back was when I Arsenal Cataclysm against Rogers in the finals. I looked at it, I had a very good idea what I was going to draw, and I had a plan for it, and I was like, all right, I'll get this out of Arsenal, yada yada. And then I drew the hand, it looked like what I thought it was, and I can't remember what happened. Matt did something, and then I got locked out of my Arsenal for the rest of the game.
I remember I was watching, I was commentating with Newson, shout out to Newson, and you definitely put our analysis to the test there, because we kept we didn't see what you Arsenal, but we kept trying to say to each other, it's like, maybe it's an Oriole plate now, and like the longer it went on, we're like, what is he saving?
Yeah.
And then we were just sort of saying, look, like, this guy is at that stage 13-1, if he doesn't play a card from his Arsenal for 4 turns, there's got to be a good reason why, so we'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but...
Yeah, no, sadly I locked myself out. I had a strat to kill Matt in like a couple of turns sooner, but yeah, that just turned to custard, and I just lost the Arsenal for the rest of the game.
Yeah, well, you did very well to stay calm, because it's one of those things where you make a mistake sometimes and it can rattle you and sort of tilt you a little bit, but I think you did well just to do what you needed to do when there. So
Absolutely.
Flipping it up, I'm just going to ask pretty much the exact opposite. What was your personal highlight of the weekend? So it can be from the tournament, the gameplay, it can be from outside. So I'm actually going to start with you, Nick, this time. And I have a sneaking suspicion it might be winning the national championship, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that was probably the highlight of my weekend for sure. But honestly, it was just getting to see everyone again, be able to catch up with Tom and Rohan and, see what all their testing has done and for them. And it was good to see them in the finals. Well, not in the finals, sorry, in the Top Cup.
Yeah, it was good to bin off Rohan in the semis, eh? See you later, mate.
Yeah, sorry, Rohan.
I got a spot for you on the sidelines, front row seats. Here you go.
Exactly.
Now, for all our listeners, Nick did tell me off camera that his absolute number one highlight of the weekend was getting to shake my hand in the post-win interview. But,
You weren't supposed to tell them that.
Oh, sorry. We'll edit that out in post-production.
Oh, perfect.
We won't. I'm kidding. Anyway, moving on. Rohan, do you want to give me your personal highlight? And it's spoiler season, so I mean, I'm going to just go ahead and guess. Was it something to do with like a certain game, perhaps in round 9 on day 1, or was there?
Oh my god, that was up there. When it comes to gameplay, obviously, like Nick said, just the national weekends are great, right? You get to meet up with all these people that you talk fab with online. The after party was great. A small highlight from the after party was Tom going around telling people to bow down.
Oh no!
I loved it.
What about the enjoy your ice? Is a better one.
But yeah, when it comes to the games, it's got to be that the game. I believe you were commentating on it, and yeah, I don't even know what to say.
Yeah, for our listeners out there, that's on the I think the CM8 channel, CYA M8.
Yeah, that's the one.
So to give a little bit of context, it looks like Rohan it looked like he was on his way to losing this game, and we're kind of thinking to ourselves after the game, is this man playing Fab or Monopoly? Because that was a get out of jail free right there. But no disrespect, no shade to his opponent in that game, Henry Moore, who's an amazing person and a great Fab player, and just a little bit unfortunate maybe in that moment. I'm like, look, I'm just going to go out. I'm going to go on record and admit I've made worse mistakes than that. To lose games. I absolutely have had games in the bag at big tournaments and just completely blown up and missed it. So it's very easy sitting on the sidelines to be like, oh, you should have done this or that. But when you're there under pressure, playing for your spot at Nationals Day 2. So my heart went out to him. But it did create one of our highlight plays of the weekend with Rohan sort of hitting the miracle sonata and having just enough to get there and win. A
funny story of that, Kieran, is that at the sealed calling that we had in Auckland, I believe it was at some point last year, I played Henry Moore in the winning in. It was basically you have to win if you want a chance to top. It was after the cut to top 32. It was, I think, the last round of draft, and I completely punted the game. I see him pitch a Ray of Hope. This is his last few cards left in deck. He obviously draws it back up. He attacks for 2. I block for 2. He Ray of Hopes and I die.
Did Henry end up making the top 8 of that tournament? I can't recall off the top of my head. Maybe
I think he did. I
feel like he did.
He did.
So, oh man, maybe he was just doing you a favor. He's like, look, Rohan, I know you take this game.
Yeah, he felt bad.
He's like, Rohan, you take this game pretty seriously. It's just fun for me, so look, I'll sacrifice myself so you can live. But no, shout out Henry Moore. You're an awesome dude, and my heart goes out to you because it was a tough play, but it was a great highlight for Newsom and I to commentate on. And last but not least, Tom Penny. Was there a sort of highlight for you, telling people to bow down here? But
I don't remember much of that. Obviously, the after party was probably one of the highlights as well. But I think probably the two main highlights, strangely enough, the first one was on the Friday. We get an early flight, and we get to, I think, Cerberus Games to meet up with a couple of guys from Wellington. So we met up with Nick and Jason and Adam. And we made our way to a rooftop bar, and then everyone else sort of started to show up from their flights from Auckland and wherever, and meet up for some drinks, and just realizing that it was a beautiful day in Wellington. We were about to compete, in a big tournament, a big constructed tournament for the first time in a long time, and it was just a blast from there, really. As far as the tournament highlight, so people may or may not know, I have a small rivalry with a certain Guardian player, Kale McCree, from time to time since we started playing back in the days. And
I know this one.
Yeah. And look, I've been pretty adamant about the Mount Heroic and to Bravo matchup, and Kale's pretty confident as well at the best of times, obviously. But I understand he tested pretty hard for the matchup. I think he had about 11 cards or so just ticked for that matchup. And we had a lot of back and forth over the weekend. I told him that he's been dodging me all day one, and he's been saying there's no way you're going to beat me, mate. And it sort of culminated in the quarterfinal pairing, and I couldn't believe my luck because I've been calling for it all weekend. And I mean, he said he wanted the matchup, but I'm not sure how confident he really was. But I managed to deal to him and bin him off, just like he bin me off, and I think one of the road to nationals earlier this season. So that one was pretty satisfying. I think it was pretty good game as well. I think the crowd liked it.
It was a great game. I watched most of that.
Yeah, it's a shame that one wasn't on stream out of my top 8 games, But
he only plays well off camera. It's like it's the classic. I can imagine Tom in high school. Oh no, my girlfriend just goes to another school. That's why you've never seen her.
But no, shout outs to Kale. He's a great player, great guy, and love playing games against him, whether it's win or lose. So it was a good time to get another top up matchup against a long-time rival, I guess.
Yeah, and for those of you guys out there, listeners, I had a little bit of an inside scoop on this because I was there at the time, and the top 8 pairing, and they both said to each other, "This was the matchup I wanted." So I thought that was quite funny. I was like, "Yeah, I definitely wanted to play you." It's like, "Oh, I absolutely wanted to play you," and it was quite funny as well because I was watching. We had the feature match way separated than the other 3 matches here, and it was pretty much deathly silent. Like I was moving around, keeping players away from the tables. But you definitely get a little bit of a constant stream of chatter from one side of the room, like, oh, hey mate, you got this? Oh yeah, like, oh, I thought you were going to attack, and it looked like Tom was actually struggling a little bit, but he pulled together a great turn with Channel Mount Heroic into Overload towards the end that and Nimblism that got him there. So that was a very cool game to see. And shout out to Kale, awesome person. Check out that Guardian guy on Facebook. I actually heard, he didn't actually tell anyone this, but I hope he doesn't mind me saying. He actually donated his top 8 playmat to one of the Wellington Youth Leagues. So Sushi Knight, Steve down there who hosted the New Zealand National Championship, he runs a youth league, and Cal donated his National Championship playmat to hand out as a prize for that. So I actually thought that was a really cool thing to do. Shows Cal has been around since day zero, great community member, so we love you. Even if you couldn't beat Tom in the top 8. And all right, sorry guys, we've gone way over time, and I always do this because I like talking too much, like the sound of my own voice. But we've pretty much got to the very end. I just wanted to go through one by one and just get any final thoughts, any shout-outs. Maybe if you can tell me the class you're most excited to play in Everfest, either based on cards out already or based on cards you think might be coming out. And I think for this one, we're going to go in reverse order for Nationals placing. So coming in outside the podium in the lowly 4th place, we've got Rohan. Now, Tom and Rohan, I know you guys are 3rd, 4th, but like...
I'll accept it. Off seeding, I am 4th. Officially, probably 4th.
I was going to say that when I came 3rd, I knew, I came 3rd, 4th, but I officially was on top because of Swiss, and I always made sure the other person knew it. So, love that. Anyway, Rohan, any sort of final shout-outs or final thoughts? Tell me something you're excited about in Everfest.
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone that I tested with. It was, it was like a team effort. I think for me and Tom, we couldn't have done it without our testing group. Shout out to my girlfriend who had to deal with me just being off the mat for a while when it came to fab testing for nets.
Yeah, bro, she's definitely gonna listen to this hour long podcast and get the shout out at the end. But okay, we hear you. Keep going.
Yeah. And everyone at Wellington, it was such a good weekend. Everyone's so positive. What I really liked is like a lot of people will just like ask you how you're doing. Maybe they're not doing as well, but they still get really hyped for you. The community's great. I honestly loved the weekend day. Everyone's so good.
I actually just wanted to give a big shout out to John down in Wellington, who came second in New Zealand National Championships last year, in 2020. Unfortunately, didn't have like the greatest run this time. I think he got burnt by a couple of bad matchups on. He was playing the prison deck as well. But I want to say, like every time I saw him throughout the whole weekend, he had a big smile on his face, and he was like talking to me, he was talking to his teammates, talking to his friends. Played the side events. So I think that goes to show that even if unfortunately you don't have the best day for whatever reason, you can kind of make your own destiny. Make yourself have a good time. So, now, Ryan, I got to ask, what are you most excited for in Everfest class-wise? Like, what do you feel you want to play after?
I mean, we haven't seen too much yet, but this rainbow Bravo, the Bravo with all three elements looks crazy. He's must have the biggest card pool now, right?
All right, lock it in. Rohan says the new Bravo is broken. If it's not, feel free to call him out. Okay, Tom. Moving on to you. Sorry, Ryan. You're done, right? That's shout out.
Yeah, good.
Okay,
Thank you.
Tom Penny, the Warrior King. Moving on to you. Same as I said to Rohan. Any shout out? Like, first tell me your shout outs, then tell me the class you're most excited for in Everfest or hero or whatever.
Sure. Well, look, firstly, shout out to all the people working so hard over the weekend. Steve, all of the judges, and people in the booth. Yourself, Kieran. I know people love the commentary that was led by yourself, and it was good to listen to it back. You did a fucking great job. Excuse my French. So, congratulations on your first big nationals as tournament organizer. So it was a great weekend for all of us, really. And there was a lot of support from the play. Like Rohan said, the players that were doing well and maybe directly competing with you for a spot, or the players that hadn't done as well as they may have hoped were still extremely supportive. For their peers, and there's a lot of love in that community that I felt was great to be a part of that weekend for sure. I guess lastly, I'll give a shout out to Kiki, who was especially, I think, gracious. I think Kiki will go on to perhaps win the title next year. So that's my prediction. There you go.
Awesome. Shout out Kiki, one of the friendliest community members you'll ever meet. And
100%.
Yeah, I feel they did extremely well. It was just, I believe going to the final draft on day 2, they maybe need to go something like 2-1 to make it, something along those lines, and maybe just missed out. So I know it's a bit heartbreaking, but I know everyone in the community's got a lot of love for you. So keep doing what you're doing. You're awesome. And now the one, the only, the New Zealand national champion, Nick Holding, aka Tidu. Give me your final shout-outs and tell me what you're excited for in Everfest, please.
All right, well, firstly, I have to give a shout-out to John again. I'm sorry for convincing you to play Prism. That was a bad idea. You should have probably just stick with Lexi or something. I don't know, but... also, I have to give a shout-out to Jason Thompson-Check, as well as the JTS. Adam Little and Ollie Berry, they came over to my house plenty of times so we could sit down and test together. Of course, shout-outs to Steve, the Sushi crew, and everyone at LSS that helped out at Nationals. And it was good to see all the Aucklanders again. It was great to have you travel down in such hard times with COVID running around.
Have them travel down and then send them packing, right?
Yeah, send them back as quick as they came down, And I'm looking forward to continuing Prism with that new attack action that I saw the other day. I think it's something replication?
Refractal.
Oh, I am looking forward to that.
That one's doing my head in already. I've got no idea, but that's quite fun. Now, Nick, I will say, actually, Friday, I've been curious the whole weekend and all the way through for a very long time. Can I ask you, and if it's private, you don't have to tell us, but where does the nickname Tidu come from? If it's an in-thing, I can say, don't have to tell us, but would you care to share with the international audience?
Yeah, right. So ages ago, I bought World of Warcraft, and I had to come up with a name, and I couldn't think of anything. So I grabbed the box and opened it up, and I saw the word Tibu, which is, instead of the D, it was a B.
Yeah.
So obviously I punched in Tibu, that didn't work, so I just flipped it around and turned it to a D, and it worked. Okay. So I stuck with it ever since.
There you go. Now, as someone myself who knows all about giving himself a nickname and claiming the community gave it, I love that,
Exactly.
All right, everyone. Well, I think that pretty much brings us to the end of the episode. I feel I've kind of roped you guys in a little bit because I'm like, don't worry, guys, it'll be 35, 45 minutes max, and then it took me like 25 minutes to get the audio working. Then I've spoken for like over an hour, but
makes for good content.
You're all absolute legends. I want to give a huge congratulations once again to you, Nick, for taking it up in the new national championship. Obviously to my guys, Toe and Rohan, to my very close friends for a number of years. You're both incredible players, and I'm super stoked that you guys made it through to the semi-finals. And who knows, maybe bigger and better things next year. I think that pretty much wraps things up for me. It's your host, Karen, Mr. Classic McIntyre, signing out. Thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. We will hear you next time. And yeah, we love you all. Can't wait.